Department of Criminal Investigation out from under the Brandon Board. And to me that makes sense, because that is DCI's function. They are investigators, and it makes sense to pair investigators with their peers. I think they learn from one another and they can support one another. In fact, I talked to the Attorney General about this to see if he would have any objection to assuming responsibility for oversight of brand investigators. And he said he'd be glad to work with us on that. So that's the approach that I would take.
Thank you, Bob, for the question. We need vigorous enforcement of the law. But you know, it's interesting to me, we have a brand inspection area in South Dakota. And the reason we do is because producers wanted it. And that was established back around the turn of the century. And we have a part of South Dakota that isn't a brand inspection area for the same reason. But it's interesting that the producers who demanded that we have that were also the ones who enforced it successfully for decades, for generations. And then all of a sudden, in the dark of the night, it ended. And I think we need to investigate whether we ought to go back to having producers, once again, who created the brand inspection area in the first place, be in charge of making sure that that law is enforced. I'd rather have that happen than having bureaucrats doing it.
We'll take another question.
If elected governor, federal lands issues. We've got a big push in the last 5 to 10 years. Non-government organizations buying up private property with the intention of turning it into federal land. And we're losing tax base. We're going to, in the future, we're going to lose more tax base. If elected governor, what's going to be your position with this turning our private land into federal land in this state?
I'd like to know specifically the areas that you're talking about. I'm not challenging you, I'm agreeing with you. But I'd like to work together with you so that we know that we're on the same page, because that's important.
Well, I'm from down in the scenic area, the Kanawha Basin area, where they did the reintroduction. We've had 3 or 4 ranches sell in the last few years down there to non-government organizations with the intent of changing them into federal ownership. We've also got a travel management plan on the national grasslands that's going to limit access to the public lands. And all these issues keep coming forward right now that are just full steam ahead. And I guess my question is, if elected governor, what could you do to keep the public access on the public land and stop the growth of federal land in our state?
It's important that South Dakota not lose any more tax base. We simply can't afford to do that anymore. Our schools can't afford it, for one thing. The level of service currently provided is inadequate in many areas. The pressure on the property taxpayer is enormous. The state is not helping out. The state's share of what we do for education has dropped from 39% of the whole budget down to 31%. So I agree exactly with what you are saying. The other thing I would point out is that the whole area of property and property rights is important, and it's an emerging issue of importance in South Dakota. Trans-Canada Pipeline is condemning property now from Harding County down, exiting the state around Winter and Gregory. This is for Keystone 2. Keystone 1 went from Marshall County down to Yankton. And the rights of those property owners, almost all of them involved in agriculture, were critically important. I had the privilege of representing the landowners up and down the Jim River Valley in those disputes, and we went to court against Trans-Canada to make sure that the property rights of those individuals were protected, and I'm proud to say that they were. But we have to be on guard. We really have to be on guard about those kinds of threats.
Well, the question was about federal involvement in land ownership, and I would be opposed to any increase in federal land ownership in South Dakota. But I think the issue goes beyond mere ownership. It also extends to federal control. And you are all aware, I think there was a question asked earlier when most of you were here, of Christy Nome about the wilderness designation bill that was proposed, or that's been proposed in Congress. And I came out several months ago with a statement in opposition to that. This is one area where my opponent and I differ. During the legislative session this past year, there was a resolution introduced to urge Congress not to pass that wilderness designation bill. And my opponent argued not to pass that resolution, but instead essentially to support the wilderness designation. I have tried to be open-minded and listen to those who are proponents for this. They say that, oh, it won't change access by producers for grazing, oh, it won't change their ability to use vehicles to go on the property for fencing or maintaining watering facilities. But in fact, if nothing will change, then why make any change? The Buffalo Gap National Grassland is just fine the way it is, and I don't see any need to turn it into a wilderness.
I'd like to know how the candidates feel about the open fields doctrine and if it should be changed.
I think one of the things that I can appreciate as a landowner is the position you are in when those who are trespassers come onto your property, whether they be folks who are hunting without your permission or whether they be people who you really don't want on your land for whatever reason. As I say, when Lynn and I got married, we bought the building site from my parents, and my two sisters and I have since inherited that quarter section. And there are a lot of people that come and that either hunt without permission or ask permission. And generally we give it when people ask. But the open fields doctrine, of course, allows game fish and parks conservation officers to head right onto your property without permission. And it seems to me we need a state policy that they will not do that sort of thing and give the landowners the respect that's due, because you're not out to break the law and you don't need conservation officers coming onto your property to check you out.